people say that the name is misleading because it's not 100%, the solution isn't 100% baked yet. But in reality, for my use cases, this is, it's not 100%. Obviously, like, you know, you can't be complacent. This is part of the deal with using the beta version and being in that program right now. Obviously, you can't just say, like, well, I can go to sleep, because it's not there yet. But what does 90% look like, or 95%, or 98%? What does that look like? Honestly, it's the scale of degree of difficulty, like I've said in some of my other videos. Like, if it was a dense urban environment with lots of moving parts, sure, it's not 99% of the way there. But in this particular condition, on these roads, it functions really well. I mean, I essentially ride 24/7 in full self-driving mode and hardly ever need to do any sort of interventions. Now, obviously, the Research Triangle Park in North Carolina is mostly suburban, and anything that you could call urban is not really comparative to Houston, LA, Sacramento, San Francisco, etc. Like, obviously, this is a more complex problem to solve when you get into those deeper, more complicated areas. But if you look at either rural United States or suburban United States, at least in the areas that I've been to in the East Coast, this technology is already somewhere between 95 and 100% the way there for a vast majority of the use cases. From what I can tell. I mean, obviously I have no way of really measuring and quantifying that, but just looking at the level of involvement that I have to have in order to make sure that it's safe. I mean, obviously I'm paying attention. Obviously I'm making sure that if anything happens, I'm ready to take over instantly. But I'm not seeing any evidence, the vast majority of the time that I'm driving, I'm not seeing any evidence of any need to intervene. This is what excites me about the technology, is that let's just say that regressions are possible, right? Meaning, like, there's a chance that it gets worse at some particular thing that it's good at now, right? However, if it's regressing, it's going to regress on some edge case, on some. My expectation is that they're not going to have some sort of massive regression where all of a sudden one day the car just acts like a Cruise or a Waymo vehicle, where it's just kind of dumbfounded by a cone, or it's no. I mean, you can, from what I can tell, you can go anywhere, especially in this area, but in many areas of the United States, you can go anywhere and expect it to function much in the same way you're seeing here. And if there is a regression, it may be something like, oh, well, the decision making when changing a lane or something like that is slightly different. But in reality, in my opinion, this is as bad as it gets. This is not as good as it gets. This is the beginning, and this is as bad as it's ever going to be. And if this is all we had, I would still be 100% comfortable with this system. Because this is, night and day compared to driving your own vehicle. And at first, obviously, I was weary. I was not confident, because you don't know. I mean, the idea of like just trusting your life with the car and all that, at first it's a little bit, not because the car is doing something strange, it's because, like, if you're following someone, you're like, is it really gonna stop? Is it gonna turn? Like, what's gonna happen? But as you experience it and as you go through that process, you start to learn pretty quickly that no, it's a lot further along than what you may have thought, right? If you just go by what the media says, apparently Tesla's, in some of these analysis, Tesla's the worst of all of the full self-driving technologies there are out there. It doesn't have a good future strategy. It's not the best. It's far behind everyone else. It's execution, it's strategy, it's market penetration. But don't sleep on Tesla full self-driving. I have yet to see an example of any other technology that can do half of what this does. Okay? It's not on pre-mapped roads. They're not some sort of high-definition scan things. No, the vehicle inspires a ton of confidence, do not be complacent. I repeat, do not be complacent. If you're using this, you're not gonna just be like, oh, well, I'm gonna pretend like nothing's gonna happen. But it's hard after a while not to think like, okay, thousands of miles have passed, and it's consistently the same or gotten better with the software updates. And there's only been, since March of 2023, we're in January 2024 now, there's only been 2 updates available to me. I went from 11.4.2 to 11.4.4, and then 11.4.4 to 11.4.9. And I've only been on the 11.4.9 for, I don't know, a week, 2 weeks, like a week and a half. And I can already tell that it's got, like when you read the release notes, sure, it's technical, and if you're not fully aware of all of the mechanisms that are part of that neural net in the AI driving, then you may not understand it from context. It's kind of like just connecting the dots without having all the dots. But with enough of an educated outlook, it's actually pretty simple. I mean, when they say things like, improve deceleration under X condition or Y condition, or, by 10%, etc., it's actually noticeable when you ride in it from one version to the next. If you're using it on a daily basis, you can see the improvement. You can see your car getting better in front of you. So there's a lot to be said about the way in which Tesla... The constant improvement is ridiculous. Like, the rate of improvement is already good, and this is before we fully saturated on the new training, supercomputer, right? Like, we're sitting at probably something like 5 to 10%, maybe 15 to 20% of the compute capability that it will have by the end of 2024. And with what we have already right now, if this was as good as it ever got, it would still be better than anything anyone has imagined so far. The evidence that we have in the last 2 or 3 years of artificial intelligence being an exponential disruptive curve, when it comes from, like, if you're talking about Mid-Journey with image recognition or image generation, or if you're talking about ChatGPT 3 and ChatGPT 4, the reality is that very quickly these technologies have progressed to a degree that's basically unheard of in the history of technology. And if you look at, for example, the rate of increase of internet speed, right, from internet speed from 1995 to internet speed in 1999, there's not an exponential increase in the improvement in the technology. There is not a massive amount of innovation happening. I mean, okay, like maybe in the business side you had like T1 lines and T3 lines, etc. Okay, it's possible that the stock exchange or large universities had some sort of quantum leap during those years. But for the general consumer, what was available to every consumer every day, there wasn't, from what I remember. I mean, maybe you went from dial-up to DSL or something of that nature. Or from 1990 to 1995, or from 2000 to 2004, 2005. In those 4 or 5 year periods, there wasn't a dramatic uptick in the United States, at least, in internet bandwidth, for example, reliability of connectivity. Or if you compare how much faster a computer gets over time, if you take like the Pentium 4 and then you compare that to the first AMD 64-bit processor, and then later processors from 2001 to 2005 they may have multiplied by, they may have increased by 50, 60, 70%. However, this is not a 50, 70, 60, 70% increase when we're talking about AI. This is something where it's magnitudes better in a period of just 2 years. Of course, every problem has its own unique set of characteristics that are required to solve it. But at the end of the day, if the other improvements in artificial intelligence are anything to go by, when you increase the compute by 100x and then you change it to be fully end-to-end AI with no human hard-coded, like less than 1% hard-coded code, the rate of increase in the last 5 years for full self-driving, in the last 6 months and 12 months for full self-driving, that rate of increase is about to be multiplied by 100 and then some. Because if you have 100x compute and then you remove a significant percentage of the code that's hard-coded C++ and you go to end-to-end neural nets, now you're talking about like there's a step change increase from going to end-to-end neural nets, and then there's also an exponential increase for ramping up to 100x compute. And then to top all that off, you have 5 million Teslas on the road now, and by the end of this year it'll be about 7 million, 7.5 million. Most likely it would be like somewhere between 2.2 and 2.5 million new Teslas on the road. So every single one of these Teslas is outfitted with the same equipment. They all have the cameras and the full self-driving computers, and they all phone data home. Some portion of what they're like recording while driving is sent home for the purpose of being used to train these systems. And there's two things that AI is really good at. One is obviously, like a single regression of a specific data point, right? Like one mode in one regression, so like for example, analyzing information about the changes in pixels or something simple like that. When I say simple, it's simple to explain, not simple to achieve. But the other thing that it's good at is creating simulations from training data. And so it's not just that it's training off of real world scenarios, it's that it's also training off of all of the simulation data that's happening. All of the simulations that are happening as the result of the data that's been generated, and the ability for AI to correctly simulate things that, if you combine first world physics, for example, dog is running across the street, ball rolls out in front of the street, object is in the street. If you take those physics and you have real world physics built into your simulations, and then you're calculating based off of those physics in the simulation, then you're getting pretty close to reality. Maybe you don't account for every single possible mechanic, although I would be surprised if they didn't have physicists working on this. Every possible physical mechanic that is involved. Maybe it's too hard to get the movement mechanics of a squirrel running across the road, or a horse or something like that. But it doesn't necessarily need to be that precise. What it needs to do is be able to react to things that it doesn't have training data for, and the simulation is a pretty good way of incorporating. AI is really good at simulations and what we've seen it do, which is regression analysis, or maybe multimodal regression analysis, depends on how you look at it. But in any case, I'm rambling a bit, but from my perspective, the quantum increase in full self-driving capabilities is about to hit. Like the ish is hitting the fan very soon. Within 12 to 18 months, my expectation is that maybe 100x compute doesn't mean 100x increase in the capabilities. Every every last 1/10 of 1%, or every edge case that gets ironed out, there's going to be some variable rate of improvement. It's not just a linear 100x compute increase equals 100x, but there's going to be growth by leaps and bounds. You're going to grow and then stabilize, and grow and then stabilize. And the truth is, with that much extra compute and reworking the software architecture, there's going to be breakthroughs, and there's no doubt about it. There's a lot of really smart people working on this, and it's clearly something that the future is now. Okay, it's going to hit us before people realize. Just like from one day to the next, all of a sudden everybody knew about ChatGPT. Sure, there were people that knew about it before, but now that it's hit a sort of critical mass, it becomes pretty evident how useful this technology is in everyday life. One other thing I should mention, from my perspective, if you have a sufficient increase, like there's a certain point, like right now, human plus driver is definitely human plus AI is definitely safer than human by itself. I mean, even really good drivers are going to have idiosyncratic tendencies when it comes to focus, or when it comes to attention to detail, and when you combine the two together, I can already see that you're less likely to get into an accident compared to just a human driver. But what happens when you start shaving off edge cases after edge case after edge case? There's going to be a point. It's hard to tell exactly when, but by using it, you definitely get a different sense than what you would read in the media. At this point, I've arrived at my destination, so I took it out of full self-driving because I just put it to stop in the middle of the street. But there's certainly a point at which it will be undeniably better than a human being, and that point is probably coming very soon. What really matters is how complicated is it to switch software architectures. Like they already have it, in testing to go to beta 12, version 12. I guess it's not going to be considered beta, but they already have that in testing. The real question is, after doing that, what complications come up that might slow down the process of, like, even if you have 100x compute by the end of the year, there may be some complications in techniques or the developments that need to be ironed out as part of the growth and development process. That being said, I saw recently on X someone who's been a software developer for 30 years saying something to the effect of, oh, well, I've been a developer for 30 years, and if you change your architecture, then, it's going to invariably be worse with tons of regressions. And while it's true that there are some things that are just going to be worse, it's also not an apples-to-apples comparison, because traditional software development relies on human beings to sit there and do a specific type of task in order to develop it. And by changing architectures, it introduces a bunch of variables, which is still true with end-to-end AI and Tesla full self-driving. The difference is there appears to be a blocker or a barrier or an upward limit of where now FSD is good, but it's got limitations in how much better it can get based off of the fact that it's still hard coding a lot of that behavior. Once you remove that barrier, now it's a race against time. All it is time, data, and compute. Whereas when it comes to the individual developer developing some software suite and they change the architecture from that guy's 30 years experience, what he's referring to is not false. It's 100% true that when developers have to completely rework their code, it takes a lot of work. But after removing the barrier and training the AI, what you're really going to get is, once they sort out every little hurdle and complication that could potentially arise, you're going to get an exponential reworking of the logic. Because neural nets are not derived from individuals sitting there and cranking out lines of code and thinking really hard about it. Neural nets are derived from computational processes that are a product of time, compute power, and the sanitization of the data. So when someone says, "Oh yeah, no, it's it's impossible to do software changes that quickly," they're talking about software that's not AI. They're talking about a different paradigm. It would be like if you reworked your software, but then you have 100 times as many engineers working on the issue 24/7 compared to before. Like you increase your engineer base 100 times, but the problem that they're trying to solve isn't based on what they believe the best approach is because they come up with some algorithm and they could introduce memory leaks and this, that, and the other. That's a completely different equation. When it comes to neural net development, yes, there's guidance, yes, there's complexity and technicality, but the first major step to getting the end-to-end functionality to grow at the pace that AI normally grows at is to remove the non-AI component. And then the second step of it is to massively increase the compute. So from that perspective, we are looking at something that's completely foreign to somebody that would normally, someone with 30 years development experience. If they're not considering the realities of AI and for what it really is, it's foreign to them. That's not something that they can just the people who know the most about it are the people that are within the context of actually using, building AI models and stuff. But even if you're on the outside of that, like myself, if you're conscientious about the amount of information that's coming out in all areas regarding AI and its development. And if you know people who work in the bleeding edge of AI in startup companies in Google and other places, and you're able to interact with them about these things on a more specific and technical level, it's possible that, you know, I just don't agree with the perspective that, well, you know, software development has always been this way, and you know, this is there's no way that it's going to work. I think that viewpoint is not grounded in reality, because we are at a completely new paradigm in the development of computer software. I mean, we're at the stage now where many problems that were virtually unsolvable because you had to hard code all kinds of conditional statements, or you had to really be extremely complicated and savvy to try to develop some sort of, you know,